Hello,
Hoş geldiniz.
I am Dr. Işılay Gürsu,
I'm Dr. Peter Cherry.
and welcome to the Heritage Turkey podcast by the British Institute at Ankara, BIAA. We are very happy to have Ender Peker with us today. We met Ender in 2016 when he was a postdoctoral research fellow at the BIAA, and then he stayed affiliated with the BIAA in different capacities, led many projects which we will be talking about. But currently, Ender is at the Middle East Technical University City and Regional Planning Department.
And I should also add that Ender is actually an honorary research fellow as well at the BIA. So just showing that he's still very much a part of our BIA group. And his research is currently on climate responsive design and urbanism, thermal comfort and built environment, participatory planning, governance of climate action and water management. So all extremely important topical issues for the current day. So let's get started. So Ender, thank you for being with us, first of all.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be with you in this project.
And my first question is about your latest project, Ender. And so Ender, you were involved in the BIA-led Water in Istanbul Rising to the Challenge project, together with institutions such as the University of Edinburgh, my alma mater, Northumbria University, Istanbul Technical University. So can you just tell us a little bit about that project and how it came about?
Well, as you said, this is a collaborative project together with different institutions and also with different disciplines. So scholars from different disciplines, we all work together to actually learn from the past. So when we say learning from the past, learning about the water management in the past, because the territory that we focus, the Istanbul, where the current contemporary city is located today, this geography was suffering from lack of water, and water management was always a problem in the area. So when we write this proposal, we thought that it would be better to look at the issue from a historical perspective. So when I state interdisciplinarity, we had archaeologists, historians, heritage engineers. So one group was focusing on the history, the past, how the water was managed in the past in the area. But also, when we say learning from the past, the ultimate aim of the project was actually to reflecting what we learned from the past to the current contemporary challenges. So there was another group, and I was also leading that group to find out the working solutions from the past and how we can integrate those with the current policies. So basically, the historical part, the archaeological part of the work was done in one sample site around Topkapı. So the ultimate aim there was to explore the systems that were used in the past, like how the water was transmitted from different spaces to the city center with the natural gravity, how the water was stored and then harvested for different purposes, different usages in the city. And while we writing this project, it was interesting because we made some preliminary interviews with the decision makers, with the local authorities. And at that time, there was a new regulation in Turkey saying that the rainwater harvesting became compulsory for the new buildings that are going to be built on a parcel larger than 2,000 square meters. But there was a big question mark regarding how are you going to translate this strategy, this policy into reality, because somehow this storage culture was lost in Turkey. Because when we look at the historical period, in the Roman period or Byzantine period, we see the storing water and then using it later is a culture. But somehow this culture is lost during the transition period to the Ottoman Empire. And then current in Turkish condition, now we can say that we are trying to revitalize this rainwater harvesting culture and storage culture somehow. So when we were writing this proposal, we said that, oh, this is a brilliant idea to generate such sort of a consortium with different disciplines and then work with local authorities, decision makers, to somehow make our findings meaningful to the contemporary challenges. So in brief, I can formulate this proposal, this project within this frame.
it's such an important project. I mean, thinking of all the efforts and that everything came into place in the right moment. So congratulations. I think that was a great idea. I would like to ask you a bit general question about your research area, because you are researching on climate responsive urban design. So can you give us some examples? What does that mean? What does it involve?
Of course. Well, we are living in the era of climate crisis. We all experience it in our everyday life, and cities are extremely vulnerable to the changing climatic conditions. So we face these like the secondary disasters that are triggered by the climate change, problems like flooding, problems like heat waves. So we are facing these issues in our everyday life. So from a point of planning and designing cities, it becomes an important issue how we are going to adapt our cities to changing climatic conditions. But at the same time, cities are main contributors to the climate change, mainly due to the use of fossil fuels and energy consumption in our everyday life. Because if you think city as an organism, as a functioning mechanism, we have transportation systems, we have housing areas. So we consume energy everywhere in our everyday life. So city lives brings a sort of energy consumption, which means use of fossil fuel. And this is the main contributor to the climate change. So from this perspective, also planners and designers should work to reduce the energy consumption in cities. So thinking about this reciprocal relationship between cities and climate change, climate responsive urban design actually stands as an approach, questioning how are we going to shape our future built environment so that we can avoid the negative effects of climate change and at the same time reduce our impact to the global climatic conditions.
So yeah, it's fascinating. I was just thinking, so I'm going back to your sort of first question, but I was thinking about, in Istanbul, the Yerebitan Sarnıcı, and I was lucky enough to join a tour, which was part of your project for that. And I remember I was reading afterwards actually about water in the Ottoman Empire, and it is interesting that there is that kind of gap in knowledge that happens from the sort of Byzantine to the Ottoman, and it was discovered sometime relatively late in the Ottoman Empire, I think. So it's also interesting to see how that knowledge can be lost. So I think that's really a kind of important aspect of that project. Sorry, that was just off on a tangent. But so another question then in terms of that is, so does climate responsive urban design also involve learning then from these ancient structures?
Absolutely. This is actually how we formulated Water in Istanbul project, because the ultimate aim there was learning from the past. In this sense, we can say that adaptation in terms of the lack of water water resources, for instance, but also in other contexts, like provision of comfort, thermal comfort, we can trace the clues of responsive design solutions in the past in the urban heritage sites. So in general, we can say that all urban heritage sites can be used as open laboratories for researchers. Of course, we are living in a different era. So we are not talking about copying what we extracted in the past, but we have different technologies today. So if we can combine the knowledge, the essence of the values there in the past with today's technologies, it would be easier to find more sustainable and resilient solutions in our future cities.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I also know that you are using a lot of participatory action research, and that's where our research combine, and that's where we were thinking quite a lot together. So I wanted to ask something specific to that kind of methodology, because you are tackling everyday problems, right? Like what is happening today and all these contemporary issues about climate change and resilience. How do you combine participatory action research in those areas?
Mm-hmm. Well, I personally enjoy extracting the knowledge from the past and present it to the contemporary decision makers. And this is something BIA also gives really importance, right? All of our projects have a dimension of policy implication as well. Participatory action research is a methodology. I can explain it briefly. There are two keywords. One is the participation, obviously, which means that participation of all actors from different organizations, different institutions, who have a voice to say about on a specific topic, water management in this case. An action refers to the act of changing something in the ongoing system. This is why participatory action research differentiates from the conventional research, because when we think about conventional research projects, what happens? We do the research and then we write the research reports, or we generate some sort of guidelines after completing the research and distribute it. Mm-hmm. But in participatory action research, the research process goes parallel to the action. So they are going together. So we don't perceive the process only as a research process, but we are acting together with the actors. So somehow the research process turns into a catalyzer so that everybody involved in the project will be able to understand how they are going to act in the face of lack of water, for instance. So in each step of the participatory action research process, let's say, we have different methods and techniques to build the knowledge together with the decision makers. Because we have scientific research findings as academics. This is quite important, yes, but this is not enough to change the implementation. So the experience-based knowledge that is brought by the authorities who have the power in their hands is as important as the scientific knowledge. So the participatory action research approach combines them together. Build the knowledge together with the practitioners. So this is how we actually turn the knowledge into action.
It's interesting, yeah, there's definitely an overlap with your work when you were talking about Visidia Heritage Trail and kind of learning from communities and looking at, so this is definitely, that's really interesting, yeah. Another thing as well is that you've been involved with a lot of local municipalities, particularly Kadıköy, which I think is also the Istanbul municipality of the BIA's choice. You were born in Kadıköy, no?
Yes,
and I used to live in Kadıköy as well, so it's a place very close to our hearts. So I wanted to ask, can you imagine that climate action can provide more relevant responses at a local level, so working through municipalities? And how do you build those connections with municipalities? Do you reach out to them or do they come to you? How does it work?
That's a great question. I'll say both ways, because when you hear about the project, are you thinking, was it a coincidence that everybody came together in this project? Well, partly yes, partly no. Because when we have a proposal, an idea, when we write it, we actually reach out to the municipalities. Because we see that the points or the gaps in practice and how we can fill the gap and help them to take action in this area. So this is the first step, an invitation to municipalities to join our projects. But at the same time, when you experience a participatory action research project, there's a trust building system. After spending a few years, after meeting some shared workshops with researchers, the trust is built between the researchers and the policymakers and decision makers. And somehow they turn back to us, showing their motivation to do some extra project, something additional. For instance, after this Water in Istanbul project, the director of climate change and zero waste in Kadıköy municipality, we were in a feedback interview with my colleague, Dr. Akgün İlhan, because we were designing and conducting the process together. And the director of this division said that, to be honest, we realized that our staff has lack of capacity in this rainwater harvesting issue. So why don't we write a new project and seek for funding to increase this capacity? And thanks to the UK international funding, prosperity funding, we received another grant and we wrote another proposal for municipalities to develop their staff's capacity in terms of rainwater harvesting implementation. And this is also in YouTube channel of the BIAA, which is accessible by public.
Perfect. In addition to the work that you have done in Istanbul, you also worked in different places like Konya Plain, Rize, and Mardin. So how does it differ? I mean, can you give us a little bit more examples about your projects from these different places?
Of course, this is quite exciting part of the issue, because when we say adaptation to climate change, each city has its own characteristics, and the challenges they vary from city to city. So, for instance, if you look at Mardin, the main problem in the city is the provision of thermal comfort due to the excessive increase in the temperatures, particularly in summer seasons. For instance, I mean, women are not able to even go out and walk on street until 7 p.m. due to thermal discomfort. But this is an issue of, human right. I mean, we should be able to walk on the streets. So the main challenge is the provision of comfort, for instance. But when you look at Rize, the main problem is the high amount of participation in the city, which leads to the emergence of flooding. So flooding becomes then the main problem of the planning and urban design in that city. Or in Konya, for instance, Konya project was focusing on provision of food and the use of water for providing that food that comes from the agricultural production. And it is quite challenging to see that how each city actually tries to cope with different challenges. But we are using the same methodology. So challenge is different, but when you look from the action perspective and participation perspective, all of those challenges, they have one commonality. Climate action calls for collective action. I mean, one single authority, this can be ministry or this can be municipality, one single institution cannot cope with this huge problem because it's a very big problem. So we need to, act collectively. And as researchers, as scientists, we should be the ones who are perhaps catalyzing this process. Because if you think about different divisions, different institutions, there is always the issue of politics. Because each city has different political dimensions, like Rize, for instance. Rize was always under the pressure of large decisions done by politicians, like biggest airport, biggest shopping mall. So somehow trying to show that they are carrying the city. Or Konya always was in the hand of some political games in terms of agricultural production, trying to maximizing their profits in the local area. So all of this political dimension calls for some sort of a third objective party, which I believe that scientists and scholars could often generate together with perhaps non-governmental organizations and other academicians working in the same field. But in brief, we can say that challenges are varying, but actions call for collaboration.
Can I just pick you up on one just terminology point? When you're saying thermal discomfort, what does that mean exactly for those unfamiliar with the term?
Well, there are different definitions of thermal comfort, but very briefly, we can say that there should be a balance between the temperature of human body with the environment that the human body is standing. So it's a balance between outdoor temperature and the human body. This is a generic definition done by scholars in 70s. But then some approaches are saying that comfort is not an issue of a formula between the body and environment. There are also some other indicators like sociocultural factors, adaptation capacities, clothing, income, for instance, because if you don't have enough money, you're not able to buy adaptable clothes. So there are different factors influencing the adaptive capacity of a human body. So it's quite a complex term, thermal comfort, but it's definitely attached to the space design.
Yeah, interesting. And just picking up on some of that you were saying, kind of the idea of like thermal comfort being attached to human rights, and then even talk about climate crisis. So it strikes me that your research can point to quite a lot of pessimistic scenarios. So how do you deal with those findings, and what are the biggest challenges in your research area?
Well, in some cases, yes, we face with some pessimistic findings and also some pessimistic actors as well. Because, for instance, in the Water in Istanbul project, we had more than 100 people participated in the project, from Ministry of Forestry and Agriculture, from Ministry of Urbanization, Environment and Climate Change, from Metropolitan Municipality of Istanbul, different district municipalities. Of course, you don't expect everybody to have same level of motivation or same level of positive attitude to change. But the critical point here is to connecting with the positive people who believes in change. That's one of the key points. Otherwise, there's no way to proceed. Because we were talking about building knowledge. We can only build the knowledge together with the constructive people. So we are trying to eliminate and stay away from the destructive people in these participatory processes. The second thing is, this is about the process itself and the collaborative mechanism. Second thing is the findings, because some of the models or findings can give some very pessimistic scenarios. But here it is important to fight with egos of the researchers. We can't save the world just with the research. So we should play with the scale of our research if we receive really pessimistic scenarios, because we can always find some areas, some points to change. So if we look from a wider perspective and we receive a pessimistic scenario, for instance, in the Konya project, because all of the modeling in the Konya and all of the interviews in the Konya drove a very pessimistic scenario to us, because the only way of sustaining this agricultural process was actually replacing all of the crop types, all of the crops that they are producing today with wheat and barley. So turning back to the past crop types, for instance, which is not possible. This cannot be done at one night. But that opens some small niche research areas. So policymakers, economists should be working on these small niche areas to find applicable solutions. So I'm not arguing that participatory reaction research process itself can solve all the problems. No, that's not possible. Even if you run this project for 10 years, you can't solve this problem. But you should identify the niche points and make the issue smaller pieces, cut it into smaller pieces. Then we will be able to find some actionable solutions to change the ongoing, very rooted, robust system, let's say.
Do you mind if I ask just something else just on that, actually? Just because I was thinking, in terms of communication of that research as well, because presumably you are having to communicate those findings not just to government authorities and municipalities, etc., but also local groups, presumably. So how do you go about, I'm just thinking in the context of this podcast, which is about research communication, for example, how do you go about communicating those findings in a way that's accessible for those different audiences?
Well, participatory action research methodology has a different communication strategy than the conventional techniques. Because in the conventional techniques, what we do the research and then we write the report or we write a policy brief and then we disseminate it. But when it comes to participatory action research, we have three different parallel process that are following each other. The first one is the scientific knowledge that I mentioned, the scientific research done by scholars. The second one is the experience-based knowledge. That is what I call also sociopolitical knowledge generated by the involved actors. And the third one is the dissemination of knowledge. So we are not waiting until the end of the process, because we are inviting also those actors who need to hear about the project to the workshops or to the meetings, to the focus groups, the meetings, so that the knowledge generation process itself turns into knowledge dissemination too, because those people are actually building the knowledge rather than standing in a passive position, rather than being a receiver of the knowledge. They are producing the knowledge together with us, together with the involved decision makers and political authorities. Of course, at the end, we are also organizing large dissemination events to make it, followable by wider audience. But the key actors are involved in the process rather than waiting at the end of it.
The knowledge is co-created already in the process.
Throughout the process, yes.
So are there any good practices that inspire you, either from Turkey or abroad?
Well, yes, there are some good practice examples, like Australia, for instance. The water management, particularly rainwater harvesting in Australia, now they're able to drink their water at the household level. So imagine that. Imagine the research behind that, because they have been working in this issue, because they faced with the severe lack of water. Imagine that there is no mains water in the city. What are we going to do? We are so much dependent on the dams in Turkey, for instance. And we carry the water from 200 kilometers outside of the city with a huge carbon footprint, of course, because we need some energy to bring it. Yeah. But when it comes to rainwater harvesting, we are able to solve this issue on the points, even in different parcels, like in Australia. So the drinkable level of rainwater harvesting is quite impressive, I think, there. Or at different scales, like at the neighborhood scale. For instance, if you have a neighborhood that are facing the challenge of flooding when it rains excessively, it is easy to design this space in a way that you fight with the negative impacts of flood, and also you store the water that comes to that region. For instance, there are some examples from the Netherlands, like more neighborhood scale or district level scale design solutions. There is a project called Water Plaza in the Netherlands. It's a plaza, shared space in between working institutions, universities, so it's quite an active space. But the space was facing the problem of flooding, and they make another participatory research project, inviting all of those actors, engineers, sociologists, to find out a working solution. And at the end, they come up with a model called Water Plaza. So when it rains, the plaza is full of water, so it turns into a pool.
Okay.
Or pond, let's say, in the city. When it is dry, it is used for different purposes, like skating, basketball playing. So it's used as a field. So what we see in the Water Plaza case is it generates a model which is applicable to different contexts, different geographies. And also we see that there are now the sister and brother projects of this water square, because they're implemented in different cities. We tried also same in the Kadıköy project, because we have the capacity, we have the knowledge, we have all different disciplines, and we have very motivated local authorities who are very willing to try something new. So we designed a process which includes capacity development with the funding that I mentioned. And this capacity development program had actually a workshop series. The ultimate aim there was to find and implement the first pilot project of rainwater harvesting in an open space, because this has not been done in Turkey before. And Kadıköy municipality, working together with İSKİ, administrative body of Istanbul, water administration body, and Metropolitan Municipality of Istanbul, we designed an area which is a marketplace next to Özgürlük Parkı in Kadıköy. We are still working on this project, by the way, but the preliminary idea is to design the marketplace, and it's an organic marketplace, in a way that we collect the water from the roof surface of the market area and use the collected water for the cleaning of the market space or cleaning of the streets. That's quite interesting because
Very creative.
this was a very collaborative process designed with the involvement of different actors. And now we are in the stage of seeking for funding for implementation, which is the biggest challenge, in such sort of projects. Because as researchers and research institutions like the BIA, we are helping municipalities and local authorities to find the funding for proposal for the research, and even for generation designing of the project. But when it comes to implementation, we need support from different institutions because our capacities are also limited, as you know.
Shall we then ask the last question, because you brought us to reality and real impact of your research. So maybe Peter, you can.
Okay.
Last question.
Drum roll. The last question then is, since you employ citizen science as a sound methodology, could you give us and our audience some tips on what we can do in our daily lives to tackle the climate crisis?
Well, great question. Thank you. Yeah, because we talk about all collective actions, but when it comes to individual level, what we should do. I will remind back the relationship between cities and climate change again. Think about yourself and the climate change. What is your contribution? First question. The second one is, how are you getting affected by changing climatic conditions? So thinking about our contribution to climate change, our everyday life, filled up with different energy consumption patterns. This includes heating and cooling, because we are using energy for heating and cooling needs, transportation, use of private cars or public transportation, such sort of choices. So think about your everyday life energy consumption and your footprint on the earth. The second side, the adaptation part of it, how are we going to be affected? Lack of water, for instance. Think about your water use in one single day. Try to save water, right? Or the resources that we are using, the food. Try to grow your own food as much as you can. You can do urban farming in your balcony or in your garden if you have space in your living area, such sort of solutions. So in brief, if you put yourself as the focal point, think about the reciprocal relationship between yourself and the climate change. How do you contribute to the climate? With your behaviors and energy consumption patterns, try to reduce them. And at the same time, how you are getting affected by the changing climatic conditions, how you adapt your lifestyle. Think about water, food, energy nexus in your everyday life.
Thank you so much. I think this is a great note to end our episode. My take on is I don't need any cooling, but I'm not going to save any heating, but I don't want any cooling. So this is my balance.
Well, thanks very much, Ender, for coming along and being part of our podcast. I think this is certainly an episode a lot of people will take a lot of practical tips from as well. So without further ado then, görüşürüz.
Thank you very much.
Görüşmek üzere.